You definitely wrote it there. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I've got you. So, well,
Where are you from, Rebecca and Sharon? Are you somewhere geographically in the UK?
Yeah, I'm Cambridge as well.
Uh-huh.
And I'm Warwickshire.
Ah,
And we do have
great.
blue sky today.
Yay. I grew up in Gloucestershire, so does that butt onto Warwickshire? I think maybe so.
Yeah, you're south of Warwickshire, yes.
Yeah. A nice part of the world.
When there aren't too many cars on the road, yes. But like everywhere else in the world, we're just hindered by traffic all the time now, which is a nightmare. But
I mean, and I guess the infrastructure just wasn't built for that volume of cars, was it? And the influx maybe of tourism on top of
that's
residential.
Right. Yeah, that's absolutely right. And the thing is, on a blue sky day, everybody wants to come to Stratford. And as you say, the roads aren't built for it, so it's just gridlocked.
Oh my.
But never mind, it's still a nice place to be.
Yes, it is. Hello, Val.
Hi, hello, hi everyone.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Hello. Well, I think should we wait a few minutes and just see? There's sort of 3 or 4 other people who are registered to join today, so maybe we should wait a minute or two longer and then start. And obviously we can send the
Oh, here's Denise.
Denise, okay, right there. And then send out the recording to anybody who, as you say, wasn't able to. So, hello, Denise, if you're here.
Hi, I've just got a call to take, so sorry.
Sure, okay.
Hello.
Oh, Denise isn't muted.
No, she is now. There we go.
Right.
Hello, Ruth.
Ruth, hello, Ruth. This is Kerry, who is doing the presentation, and Ruth works as a mediator at the Family Mediation Trust.
Hello.
Hi.
Welcome. Where do we find you in the country?
In the country?
Yes, where are you? I'm in Yorkshire. Where do I find you sat today?
I'm sitting actually in France.
Oh, okay, now we're all jealous.
And it's sunny.
Oh, wow. How lovely. I hope that doesn't mean that you're joining us from holiday, Ruth.
No, actually, I just finished a MIAM just this minute. So I'm on call.
Oh, well, it's great to have you with us. Thank you. Thank you for coming. Over to you, Belinda. Do you think we start and then pick up?
Yeah, I think that's probably a good idea. So I guess welcome first of all, everybody, to the next of our lunch and learns provided by the trust, bringing to you different elements of information and support that might be helpful for mediators in the field. Today we'd like to introduce Kerry Lawlor. She is a qualified integrative psychotherapist and supervisor supporting individuals through psychological challenges. She holds a master's in psychotherapy, postgraduate diploma in counselling, BACP accreditation, and associate member of Resolution. Kerry serves as a director at the Workplace Collective, specialising in mental health support for legal professionals. She has provided reflective practice supervision for family lawyers in national teams up and down the country for over 6 years. She contributes to the Law Society publications and runs the leadership programme for the Mountain Rescue Team of England and Wales. So that's not mediation, I don't think.
It could be though.
Yes, well, there's always a role for mediation, isn't there?
Yeah.
So Kerry also delivers mental health training to organisations developing wellbeing strategies, high performance mindsets and resilience. Kerry's integrative approach, it's probably important to understand where she's coming from, tailors therapy and supervision to individuals' needs, drawing from evidence-based modalities, including internal family systems, cognitive behaviour therapy, trauma-informed care, mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, and compassion-focused therapy. These are all elements, of course, that can very helpfully be brought into the mediation space. As a supervisor, Kerry supports caring professionals in many settings, containing those who contain others' human distress. So I think we all know a lot about that, thereby reducing the risk of vicarious trauma and burnout. And finally, as a mother of three, Kerry brings, as many of us do, a holistic understanding to her practice, recognizing the interplay between personal experiences and mental health. Through her expertise, Kerry helps individuals develop resilience, self-understanding, and pathways to growth. And I guess that's what we're all waiting to hear about today, Kerry. So over to you, if that's okay.
Thank you, Belinda. Oh, it's excruciating hearing someone read your bio. Oh, I had that kind of cringy feeling in my body. Thank you, Belinda, for introducing me so thoroughly. I'm really pleased to be with you all today. And I'm going to be talking to you about stress and burnout. And as Belinda's already said, I swim in the water mostly of family lawyers. And actually, Belinda and I met, I don't know, 6 months ago at the first event I'd been to that was for mediators, which was a day conference. And I spoke about stress. And so we hit it off, didn't we, Belinda, and said this is perhaps something that we could apply to you guys as mediators. So yeah, my kind of specialism is the exposure to vicarious trauma, and that's this kind of notion of being impacted by other people's trauma. And that doesn't necessarily mean that the stories have to be toe curling, although sometimes they are, but actually interfacing as you do with human distress. And that could be, distress as in upset, sad, but it also could be angry and confrontational. So kind of all aspects of that kind of spectrum of distress. So we're going to dig in to a little bit about stress and burnout. What does stress look like? What is happening in your body and in your brain when we're having a stress reaction as a mammal? And we're going to have a little look at your own stress profile. I won't ask you to share too much. But then I'm going to give you some techniques for reducing your stress and perhaps looking at mitigating the sort of levels of stress that you might be exposed to through the practice of reflective practice or clinical supervision, which is a term that we use in kind of my field in psychology and psychotherapy. So we've got just under an hour, I think. I'm going to open the chat box on my screen here because I'm going to ask you, I guess, to start off. Hang on, let me just move the slides along a minute. Sometimes I get ahead of myself. Stress and burnout.
Can people see slides?
Oh, can you not see slides?
No, it says can't display presentation.
Oh, how odd. But if everybody else can, we're good?
I can,
You
yeah.
can.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry, Denise.
Yeah, I can.
I'm going to leave and I'll rejoin because sometimes that helps.
Yes.
Sorry.
Okay. No. Thank you for flagging that. Sometimes Teams can be funny, can't it? Okay, let's start with stress and burnout. What we know is it's pretty prevalent in the UK workforce at the minute. We know that 1 in 4 people are experiencing mental health distress. 20,000 people a month are being signed off, just short of 86 million prescriptions per annum for antidepressants. We know we've got a problem, and we know that is actually also... Oh, can you see my presentation or is it gone again?
No, it says can't display presentation.
No, mine just disappeared for a minute, but it's back. Okay, I'm glad you can still see it.
Yeah, I can't see it at all, but I'll just listen.
Denise, what we'll do afterwards is I'll send a PDF copy of it so that you can have a look at it
Don't
afterwards.
worry, I'm sure it'll be useful anyway.
Okay, good. Okay, so yes, stress and burnout. So we know it's occurring in our landscape. We know it's occurring in our families. We know it's occurring in the individuals that you're going to be interfacing with and working with. And we know that it's a problem that's going to show up in your offices and show up perhaps even in your workplaces too. So I think I read a study yesterday that said that 69% of family lawyers were experiencing had experienced a mental health issue in the last 12 months, and 48% of them were experiencing stress every day. Now I know that I might be talking to a room of people who aren't lawyers but are mediators, but I think given that we don't have much data about mediators, and that would be great to get, wouldn't it, Belinda? I'm kind of guessing that because you're swimming in very similar water with very similar clients and very similar content, that there's a good chance that we can assume that some of that stress is also washing out into your field. So that's why I think that this is probably relevant. And I wonder if you could chat in the box to me what you think it is about your role that makes it so stressful, or maybe not stressful but just challenging and difficult. Could you add some words or phrases into that chat box for me? Unresolved anger. Yeah Difficult people. Managing conflict. EMO, projections, blame, high emotions. And I think as mediators, you sit somewhere between family therapists and lawyers. And so you are exposed to this idea of two parts, aren't you? Two individuals. And of course, holding space for those emotions and the distress, the projections, the conflict between the two. So yeah, increasing neurodivergent clients. Interesting. Thank you for saying that, Alison. I think, and actually, I was saying to Belinda yesterday, if some of you will know Karen Walker. We did the presentation during Family Mediation Week about narcissism. And of course, you're also going to be experiencing individuals, clients that come into your room that are on the antagonistic personality disorder profile. Thank you. On occasions, inability to help. Yeah, we're not good with powerlessness, are we? So yeah, thank you for that. I'm going to move on to the slide of, and over the last couple of years, these are sort of bullet points that I've picked up as I've gone along about why you guys come off badly. And I think the first thing to say is I think I could make the assumption that I'm working with a group of pretty high functioning, high achieving people, academically, possibly professionally also. And with that, we see quite a lot of task orientation, quite a lot of problem solving mindset, quite a lot of perfectionism, quite high expectations on yourself. So I quite often say that sometimes you're your own worst enemy, because there is such a high expectation on you to get it right, and when you don't, you beat yourself up. So kind of high levels of self-criticism. And I think that is something that we kind of bring into these settings, this idea that we're there to kind of save the day and solve the problem. We've also just, if we look out systemically, we've got this hustle culture, haven't we? We've got this metric of success that we're busy and that we're on it and that we're available 24/7 and, we're just, top of our game. And I think that hustle culture creates this expectation on ourselves. And one of the things I notice is that with high achieving, high functioning, intellectual, professionals, self-employed, often they don't have the off button. So it's like an engine with the accelerate on, down, you know, full on, and their body just doesn't know how to rest. So actually one of the reasons that stress is so, it felt so strongly is because there isn't an off switch. You're not able to down-regulate your nervous system and to rest. Weekends are for jobs. And actually sometimes you can feel guilty if you're not doing something meaningful or something that achieves something. And that's just the kind of nature of the characters. And you might be sitting there thinking, no, she's completely wrong. She hasn't got me at all. Or you might be sat there kind of curling under your desk. Thank you, Sharon. But we also then sit in this environment, don't we? The regulatory systems, a high demand environment, and I'm not sure what settings some of you mediators might interface with, but we know that in lots of cases there's high work or intensity. There can be some powerlessness, so low autonomy, some kind of sketchy psychological safety, which is this term we use to describe the ability to make mistakes and get things wrong or ask questions. And if any of you sort of have interfaced in law firms, that can be prevalent. And also sometimes people's management skills have got a lot to be desired. And I think there was a study came out of Headspace last year that said 70% of workplace stress is from poor managers. There's a big burden on managers to manage us well. But then let's skip over to the content. And actually, I'm going to talk a little bit more about vicarious trauma. But I think what we have to nod to is also that you are very often live in the breakdown of a relationship. So the tape hasn't stopped playing yet. You are part of the rupturing and the resolving of a relationship. So that means that you are quite uniquely placed to be kind of sometimes slap bang in the middle of the breakdown of a relationship, and that makes you on the front line of human distress, perhaps in a way that I think could be, and tell me if I'm wrong, but there will be some days where you'll come out of a session and you'll think, oh my days, that talk about black smoke. Therapists talk about the idea of human distress kind of being left like a psychological debris of black smoke around us. And I dare say there are some sessions where you're like, can't see out of the smoke. And then I'm going to talk about the idea of saving the day. I would imagine falling into a career in mediation that you are caretakers, that you are sensitive, you are empathic, you found yourself working with humans because you want to make a difference. And that kind of characteristic of your personhood, that sensitivity is your USP. It's great, but good Lord, it's something that we have to protect when we're working in this kind of intensity. And then I'm going to just throw it out there. We are also in life stages, aren't we? We come with our parenting responsibilities, our caring responsibilities, our family and our family lives, our health. I'm 50 and I'm so wildly perimenopausal, and that has impacted my ability to kind of hold space. So let's just kind of recognise that, and then let's not talk about the political climate and the financial situation in the UK at the minute. That's tricky, but there are really good reasons why the whole of the United Kingdom is experiencing high levels of mental health distress. But there are some really specific reasons as to why I think swimming in the water that we do, working in this setting, that there are some extra reasons as to why we might be exposed to it more. And I want to touch on vicarious trauma now. But I love this quote from Remen, and he said this: the expectation that we can be immersed in suffering and loss daily, not be touched by it, is as unrealistic as expecting to be able to walk through water without getting wet. And I think sometimes we don't give enough credence to the impact of our client material on us. And to this, I use the vicarious trauma model that came out in 2017 by Molnar, Sprang, Killian and Gottfried. This is the vicarious traumatization model. And some of you will be really, really familiar with this. My friend and colleague Joanna Fleck wrote the book Vicarious Trauma in the legal profession following her research into the impact of it. But we see this, we see the exposure. So a really difficult MIAM, distressing email content, toe curling domestic abuse, perhaps child alienation. We see the distress of the, injustices that both sides feel. You're exposed to it. Graphically, perhaps, certainly audibly, and in the present, energetically. So if you're doing kind of live sessions, in person, by that I mean, you'll also be feeling the kind of energy of that too. And it goes in two directions. It goes to a kind of change in worldview, and that is this sort of cynicism that we can find that some people describe, well, I'm just long in the tooth, it's water off a duck's back, it doesn't even touch me anymore. And we think that that's the kind of mark of achievement when we're a bit longer in the tooth. Actually, what it is representative of often is that the vicarious trauma has meant that we've just kind of got a worldview change, a perspective on things that might be kind of negative or cynical. And then we have this other end, which you can see there, the spectrum of effective responses. And let's nod to the fact that some of us have vicarious resilience. Some of us are empowered and enlightened by this work and love it. Love making a difference, love getting in the nitty-gritty of things, and it has a positive outcome. But on the whole, having done 6 years of supervision for people doing this kind of work, family injury breakdown, I would say that oftentimes there's a negative response. So we see this secondary response, and sometimes that can look a lot like burnout. I'm going to talk about that a bit more, but the kind of emotional exhaustion, the can't be botheredness, the kind of fatigue. And at the furthest end, that can also look like a kind of PTSD response. So kind of flashbacks, waking up in the middle of the night worrying about a client from 6 months ago that things didn't go well, or a client that's suicidal, perhaps, that you kind of losing sleep over. And at the bottom there, you can see the word compassion fatigue. And vicarious trauma is sometimes used with the term compassion fatigue. And that, again, is that sense of just disconnection from the kind of emotion of the work. And I don't know, if I were to sit and do a little assessment on you all now, I wonder where I would find you. And some days you might fluctuate. Certainly if you're a woman, there's a good chance that there would be a fluctuation in your ability to kind of process that. So vicarious trauma is not insignificant. In family law particularly, they reckon your exposure is that of the emergency services. So I think the second most stressful profession in the UK is lawyering. And although I recognise, and please forgive me for referring to that industry, I recognise yours is different, but you're kind of swimming in similar water. So I'm kind of clutching at my data here. Let me talk to you for a second about this, the superhero complex. Anyone got the superhero complex, or anyone prepared to admit to having it? This is not actually a diagnostic disorder. It's not something that we find in our psychology DSM, but it's definitely a pattern of behavior that we see. And in other academic literature, we call it the human giver syndrome, or caretaker in kind of codependency language. And that is essentially where you have this unhealthy sense of responsibility. Your responsibility far outweighs your professional burden, and with it comes this kind of guilt and this perfectionism, this sense of being indispensable, that you have to do this, and you have to do everything. And it can be depleting of your energy bucket, but you can't seem to stop yourself from saying yes when you should say no. And this burden to save the day, the superhero complex, I find this a lot. I wish I'd been taking data from the beginning of my work, but this idea that you kind of swoop in and you save the day. And I think you do save the day in so many ways. And having myself been through a process of mediation, I can tell you save the day, but the burden on you to always be that can be significant. So let me just kind of highlight that. And if you notice that you're doing it, try and bring some awareness to, hang on a minute, what, am I doing that superhero thing that I do? How far is the burden of my responsibility for this individual or this couple or this case that I'm working on? I could talk to you about that really for the whole rest of the hour, but I won't, because I want to talk to you quickly about the science of stress. So let me just move on to that, because stress isn't something that just happens in your brain. It isn't just neurological, it is also physical. And I want to, and any of you that have experienced any anxiety will know it's most definitely a kind of physical flooding of your nervous system. But here's a question: is stress bad for you? And the answer is no. It is the imbalance of the demands against your coping resources that can be bad for you. And I'm using Dimitri's model of job demands when I describe the imbalance, the seesaw, as the picture that I've got, because when the demand is matched by your coping resource, you're sweet, it's fair, you're balanced, nicely balanced. When the demand is more than your coping mechanism, you're likely to feel overwhelmed. And then quite possibly I might be speaking to a room of people where when there is no demand and you're quiet, you're likely, and you have high levels of resource, you're likely to be bored and also stressed, because where's the work coming from? And I find this kind of funny seesaw. You guys are quite unique in that profile. When you don't have a lot of work on, you're more stressed than when you do have a lot of work on. But what we think about stress really matters. The value that we attach to it definitely matters. And recognizing that the stress experience, the threat response, I'm going to talk about that, isn't bad for you. We are designed to deal quite resiliently with challenge, difficulty, distress. But what happens is when we get stuck in a cycle of high exposure to stress, we get stuck. And I'm quoting there from the Nagoski sisters. They wrote a fabulous book on Burnout. They're two American twins, and they've got some brilliant podcasts as well, which I think I've got at the end of this presentation as links for you. But the Nagoski sisters say this: being stuck is what's bad for you. So, question: which one's having a stress reaction? It's not a trick question, but it kind of is, because the answer's both. The lion, using drive, its drive response, motivated to get its prey, is also having the exact same psychobiological stress response physically in his body of cortisol and adrenaline as the prey, the predated, which I think is bison, maybe ox, I'm not sure, who is also having a stress response, which is fight, flight, get the hell out of here. And I think recognizing that there are times when stress, I'll move on to the next slide, is good stress. So it improves your focus, your motivation, your endurance. I have a colleague who's an athlete. He's a sports psychologist for elite athletes, works for the Olympic team, and he says that they are trying to get their athletes to that absolute, or just before the tipping point, where the adrenaline and the cortisol and the focus and the drive and the energy, you all know what it feels like when you're about to go in to do something massive. That gives us the kind of peak of human performance. We don't want to get rid of it altogether, but there is definitely that tipping point where our coping resources diminish, and then we fall down the other side into distress. And that can look like overwhelm, mental, physical, and emotional. And I think it's important for us to really recognise that not being able, when we're working with stress, this element of you not being able to turn off, not being able to rest and reset, means that you're much more likely to tip over. Because if you were, and I'm going to move on to the next slide here, this is something we call the window of tolerance, maybe you use this model too. If you were able to recognize that you're activated, deactivated, activated, deactivated in the course of a day, maybe 10 times, an email comes in, you can feel your heart rate go up. Somebody looks at you funny across the office, your child rings and says, I've got no money. You know, that just happens in my house. Daughter procrastinating for her A levels. You know, there's an activation and deactivation. If we can stay in that window of tolerance, and if we can rest and reset, then there's a good chance that we stay in this optimal zone. We're not going to be really, really high in hyper arousal, which is the kind of anxiety and the panic attack kind of end, or really, really low and deactivated, which is where we get into kind of mood slumps and numbness. We're going to stay in this optimal zone. And my job as a supervisor and as a therapist is to try and get people into that window of tolerance, try and build resilience and build techniques for you to be able to cope in that kind of zone. So we have a human brain here, and I think I need to try and explain really that we are still catastrophically dominated by our limbic brain. And by that, psychologists are reckoning that we've got another couple of million years, if we make it that long, to evolve as a species before we are not dominated by our limbic brain. And our limbic brain is our mammalian brain. And the mammalian brain is only concerned with one thing, and that is survival. So anything that registers as threat, sound, if I were to let off a big bang, you'd probably all jump. Before you knew what it was, your adrenaline would have fired and you would have been up and ready to fight or flight. It's milliseconds that we are aware of something moving behind us, a sound that we think is tricky, or you know, potentially hazardous. Our brain is obsessed with threat. And some psychologists say that anxiety is the human condition because we have this dominant brain structure that is the middle bit, the green in the middle of that picture there, that is driving so much of our behavior. But here's the thing, Homo sapiens evolved to have this prefrontal cortex behind our forehead, and that prefrontal cortex is our thinking brain, our rational problem-solving brain. Fabulous piece of kit, and I'm hugely oversimplifying this, but please bear with. Hopefully I can get my point across, which is this: we are able to think our way into a limbic threat. So it doesn't have to be that there is a saber-toothed tiger outside of my door for my brain to activate, that there's a threat to flood my body with a fight-flight episode. Just the thought that there could be a saber-toothed tiger in my garden is enough to trigger the limbic brain, which is why it's so critical that our thinking brains, what we think about, what we catastrophize about, how we manage anxious thoughts, is so important. And so many people will say that I'm so stressed. And actually, when we spill out on paper and therapeutically write down sometimes what are the things that you're actually stressed about, sometimes they're not real, sometimes they are just hypothesized, sometimes they are just catastrophized. They might never have happened, they might never happen, and yet the body is behaving and responding as if it was, and as if it is, as if it was, as if it's happening in the moment. And oftentimes when we've had trauma, we've had tricky stuff, we live in a constant reminder of threat is available, threat is a possibility. And when we're working in situations where it's our job to time travel forward, run scenarios, make strategy suggestions, then we also find ourselves catastrophizing very easily. So recognizing that our limbic brain is really not helpful to operating in the culture and in the working environment that most of us do. And this is the stress cycle. You'll have recognized it: the fight, flight, the freeze, and the fawn. And I dare say you also see some of your clients also moving through this. You might have people that are fawn, that appease, that are compliant. You might have kind of just frozen states. You'll definitely have got fight and aggression and kind of movement towards, and you'll also have the kind of flight. I just need to get out of this. I just can't, I need to just escape. So the stress cycle, Nagoski sisters say, has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And at the point at which you have one stress cycle, so I'm going to use an example. You've just come out of a MIAM, and your body has registered threat. So it's secreted cortisol, it's secreted adrenaline, and your body now is processing through your blood, through your heart, through your liver, high levels of stress hormone. Now, that cycle needs to end. But often what we do is we just move on to the next stressful event. We open our emails or we take a phone call. And so over the course of the day, we're not closing our stress cycle. We are just going up and up and up and up. And I'm going to talk to you about how do we close the stress cycle in a second, but I want you to get this point that we have to close almost each and every stress cycle that we experience. So micro movements, for example, if you have a stroppy email from a client and you sit at your desk and you register the threat, you feel that stump in your body of, it would be really helpful for you to stand up and do, if it is available to you, 5-star jumps or jumping jacks, or to literally, I don't know if you can see, I've got a little trampoline out there. Can you see that? I bounce on my little garden trampoline. Just 1 minute, I'm closing the stress cycle. Cortisol, when it's secreted on a normal turn of events, would last about 20 to 25 minutes in your body, and it goes in through your neurotransmitters, out, and then your heart beats, and it pumps the blood through your heart, down, cleans into your liver, and goes out through your urine. So using movement as a way to close the stress cycle, micro movements, is incredibly helpful. I'm going to say a little bit more about that. But look, what is burnout? People ask me this all the time. Burnout isn't in our diagnostic manual. It is understood by the World Health Organization as a occupational phenomenon. I think it will very quickly move into the DSM-5, but what we recognize is burnout is the culmination of exposure to repetitive stress. So that is when you're not closing your stress cycle. You go from one day to the next with just more and more and more and more and more and more and more, so that you're like a pressure cooker with the steam bursting out of it. And burnout can look a lot like that. And actually, oftentimes what happens with burnout is people hit a physical wall, and their physical symptom manifests. And I've worked with so many individuals that have had things like Bell's palsy, the side of their face has slumped, or in fact, one client that I worked with lost sensation down the side of her arm. Another client I worked with worked on the trading floor in the stock market, collapsed and was actually off work for 2 years with paralysis. And lots of people will experience kind of gut issues, tummy issues, head issues, jaw issues. So we see cognitive, emotional, and physical impact of stress. And at its kind of furthest spectrum, we can see that it kind of makes us, I describe it as kind of hit a wall and slide down it. And it's not to be trifled with, and really, really very kind of serious to recover from. So recognizing, and if any of those words on there that you see, you're kind of recognizing, I guess now is the moment for you to go, yeah, I probably need to just bring my stress levels down a bit. Here we go. What happens when we don't end our stress cycle? I love the graphic of the little matchsticks describing the burnout. Thirdenberger described burnout as exhaustion, cynicism, and reduced personal efficacy. The idea that we start to think we can't do our job, we're rubbish at our job, we shouldn't be here. The mental distance, the depersonalization. There's a line in psychotherapy literature that says that Mr. Duffy lived 2 feet from his body. And it's always stuck in my mind because I think that when we get really, really overwhelmed, there's a sort of disassociation. We start to feel like we're not actually in our bodies. We're living a couple of feet away. We're missing all the present moment stuff. And so we get this emotional exhaustion, this feeling of depletion. And it isn't just, well, you want to feel a bit tired. It's that I can't do another day of this. That's what burnout looks like. Tricky. Freudenberger said that. Emotional exhaustion is the fatigue from caring for too much for too long. But the Nagoski sisters say this: the stress response, our limbic brain firing over and over and over again, is likely to kill you faster than the stressor will, unless you do something to complete the stress cycle. And with our last 10 minutes, I'm going to quickly whiz through how do we do that. I love that picture of a pressure cooker. I'm perhaps with a group of women that know what cooking with a pressure cooker looks like. Many of my young people that I work with don't know what that looks like because they didn't cook with one. But I can remember it boiling away on the stove top and the steam. There would be a valve, and if you went near the valve, it would scold you with a steaming hot steam. And I guess for me, that's a really good picture of understanding what it feels like to have high levels of stress and burnout in your body. And we need to press that valve so that we can have a release of that. And the foundational skill of this, and I know that as a psychotherapist, I witter on about this all the time, is a self-awareness, a really, really realistic appraisal, a U-turn, we call it, where you turn inward in a kind of reflective way, either on your own or with a facilitator, but you turn inward and you go, how am I actually doing? Because the reality is that you are all using coping mechanisms already. And this is actually a Slido slide, but Teams doesn't like me doing Slido, so I'm just going to ask you to put that in the chat. You are already coping with stress. For me, it's a glass of Chardonnay. And I don't know about you, but sometimes a bag of chocolate. Sometimes I feel like I just need to run away from home, get away from all my children. But we are all using coping mechanisms, and I'm wondering if any of you could indicate what they are. Thank you. I can see people typing the garden, walking the dog. Yeah. Anyone into scrolling and numbing on social media? We can lose hours on Pinterest or Instagram or LinkedIn. Anyone a shopper? I came across someone the other day who does like stress shopping, and then 3 days later has the kind of parcel shame coming to the front door. Feeding the hens. Oh, Alison, that sounds blissful. Gardening, walking, nature. Oh, and a great husband. Thank you, Access Mediation. So I guess we recognise that sometimes we have maladaptive stress coping mechanisms. And I see that you've listed all of the good ones, mostly all of the good ones: yoga, gardening, Pilates, personal training, exercise. I'm thinking you guys need no help whatsoever. But I think maybe if you did a little realistic appraisal, there would be times where you don't get it right. Or there'll be times when you do think, how can I cope with this black smoke that I'm experiencing? So here we go. This is an exercise that you can, we're not going to have time to do it together, but I want you to take it away, because this is a really useful one. It's sometimes a useful one to do with clients as well, which is, what is your stress signature? What are the things that are in your container, or your stress bucket, as I like to call it? Because one, your stress container the size of it can fluctuate. So sometimes it can be big and you're cooking on gas over here and everything's great. And sometimes your stress container can shrink. And actually things that did overwhelm you last week don't overwhelm you this week. Maybe you're going through a period of your own personal crisis. Maybe you have a poorly parent or a relationship challenges. There's a good chance that the size of your container will be reduced. But then you have the stressors in, and you've got the capacity line on that drawing there. So, and sometimes when your container is shrunk and the stresses are still coming in, you can recognize that your capacity is literally on the lip. And then one more thing is going to tip you over the edge. So you'll see though that there's a little tap, the green marker at the bottom there, and that tap represents coping strategies. That's how do we let water out of the tank. And the exercise here, and I really recommend that you do that, is to do a little realistic appraisal of what the things that are in my tank. So draw a little bucket and think, what today are the stresses that are in my tank? And then the second part of this exercise is to think about what are the things I can control, what are the things I can't control? Because there are things we can't control. I can't control my GCSE and my daughter's A-level study, can I? I can worry about it, I can stress about it, but I can't control it. So there are some things I can, some things I can't. And usually in this exercise, when you've worked out the things that you can control and you've separated them from the things you can't control, it kind of feels like you're able to actually problem solve, write a list, address some stuff, change some boundaries, make some decisions, kind of pull the focus, the lens pulling focus on what's important for you. And as an exercise, this is a really, really good one. Sometimes I think stress the thoughts that whistle around in our brain are like trainers in a washing machine. They bang about, and if we open the door of the washing machine and get them out, we can have a good look at them. And in doing so, I think that's a good analogy for writing the thoughts down, writing the things down that are stressing you out. And you probably have all got lists. I'm a list maker, a list of all the things I've got to do, but sometimes we don't do that. What are the things that are actually really, really troubling me today? When you write it down, there's lots of research to evidence this. Penny Baker, American psychologist, did a huge piece of work on this. In fact, his life work is about expressive writing, writing down the things that are troubling us. So this is a really useful exercise and I want you to have a look at it, but not the whole story. And pragmatically, as I've said, making a plan helps, obviously, but your body has to deal with the stress and the emotional response. You still have cortisol in your system, and that has to be drained from your body as a separate task. So knock yourself out with your lists. Brilliant, brilliant, brilliant part, but it's not the whole story. And let me tell you about how we close the stress cycle. I've already hinted at one of them, which is movement. Now, all great, girls, if we're doing marathons or we're going to the gym a couple of times a week, winner, chicken dinner, I will always recommend that. But I want you to think about micro movements. I want you to think about movement snacking, as I've heard people call it. I want you to think about doing some squats while the kettle's boiling. I want you to think about lapping the building that you might work from in your lunch break. I want you to think about going up and down the stairs if you've just come out of a Mayam and you can feel your body brimming with cortisol. I want you to think about the 10 times in a day that your brain might have triggered a stress response, and I want you to think about closing that cycle just as quickly as you can. Micro movements. If there's only one thing you remember from this whole yabba dabba dabbering of me today, is that movement, move as much as you can. Doesn't have to be hardcore HIIT classes. In fact, for women of a certain age, it's not recommended for us to do that because it increases our stress response, but movement certainly is. So do what's available to you. Like I said, a psychiatrist friend of mine said he used a mini trampoline after patients, and I thought, well, if it's good for the goose, it's good for the gander. And so I have this little trampoline. Don't use it for exercise, but I bounce on it for 1 minute in between sessions, and it just resets my nervous system. I can feel it drain out of my back as I'm kind of bouncing. My neighbours must think I'm bonkers, but you know, no matter. Hopefully I'll have some longevity. Breathing, almost too simple for me to say, but do not miss breathing out, because we were designed to have this incredible mechanism in our body, which is our breath, that can throw our parasympathetic nervous system, that is activated when we have cortisol, into soothe by simply a breath practice. So the most basic one that I'm sure you'll all have heard of before is box breathing, where you inhale, hold, exhale, hold, inhale, hold, exhale, hold. And you can take yourself off to the loo to do that. You can do it for, you know, up to a minute. You might get 6 or 8 rounds in a minute of box breathing. Essentially, the box is designed that you elongate your exhale, but in doing so, and hold, inhale, elongate your exhale, you slow your breath rate down, and in doing so, you are telling your body that it's not in threat anymore. And in doing so, you will soothe your nervous system. So I'm all into meditation. I'm all into lovely long kind of breath practices. There's a gazillion out there. Just hit up YouTube or any of the fabulous breathing apps. But please don't think that that's something for those Gen Zs. This is definitely something that can absolutely impact your nervous system. I'm going to whiz through these because I'm aware of the time. But look, this is a fabulous list. Oh, no, I went too far. Because positive social interaction, laughter and affection, I can group those together probably. They are all highly researched ways of reducing stress in your body. We are a social species. We have a loneliness pandemic. We live in our little silos. We absolutely must co-regulate with others. So if you don't live in family groups, find maypoles, find a choir, find a Pilates class, find a running club, I don't care what it is, WI, just find a way of co-regulating yourself with others. You will notice your body down-regulate. You'll notice that laughter and affection. Do you know that a hug, body to body, so you really do have to choose to do this with the right person, otherwise you're going to get yourself into trouble, but a body to body hug where you both hold your own body weight for 30 seconds gives you a huge dose of oxytocin, which reduces the cortisol in your body. And if those of you that are kind of huggers will know that you go, so use it as a tool. Of course, weeping, we love blimmin' English. We don't like British. We don't like weeping, do we? And yet it is our valve. It is our actual release valve built in, funnily enough. So nobody doesn't feel better after a good cry. So I want you to not ever inhibit tears. And in actual fact, sometimes people say, I really find it hard to cry. Watch a movie that will make you cry. I'm told the latest Bridget Jones is a crier. So sometimes you need to cue yourself up to be able to have that release. Incredibly helpful. Creative expression, so that is writing, something that's playful, something that has no actual outcome required, no task. Brené Brown and if you haven't come across her, you really must. She, in her wholehearted research, came up with this idea that we don't play. We stop playing when we become adults. We stop free playing just for the sake of it. And actually we ought to play. It relieves our stress. So think about something that you could do. And sleep and rest. I teach about sleep a lot. Sleep disturbances, anxiety and sleep issues are a big part of my work. And actually, as a mammal, it is critical that we sleep and rest. We have to reset. So thinking about prioritizing rest is critical, as is being careful by others and engaging your imagination. And by that, and I'm going to sort of pretty much end with this, is the idea of visualization. I love the idea of visualizing and relieving yourself by visualizing safe places, by visualizing things that are hopeful, swelling your gratitude by thinking about all the things that you can be grateful for and imagining all the things that are to come. Our brain has, just as equally as our prefrontal cortex has the power to trigger our threat, our prefrontal cortex and our imagination has the power to move us and to shift our mindset and to shift the feeling in our body. When we line up, when we start to practice gratitude, for example, we really notice a change in the energy in our body, and it changes how we think about things. So I guess I close with these couple of slides. Can I ever be stress-free? The answer is we're not actually meant to be stress-free. And Nagosi used to say this, to be well is not to live in a state of perpetual safety and calm, but to move fluidly from a state of adversity, risk, adventure and excitement back to safety and calm and out again. That's what we're aiming for, ladies, that window of tolerance. And I think it's important to recognise that we can grow resilience, we can grow and change our relationship with stress and how we manage it ourselves. But the research says, in terms of, for family law, specifically looking at the thematic review out of the SRA and the Law Society and Law Care and all of those wonderful governing bodies, and probably similar for yours, is that trauma-specific training, peer support, critically peer support, and look, we're here together doing formal and informal peer support, and then this idea of external reflective practice or supervision. And I know as mediators you guys have to have supervision for matters of the content, but I wonder how many of you actually engage in any therapeutic reflective practice or therapeutic supervision, and if you don't, then I really do recommend it. Because it helps to grow resilience through the empathic therapeutic support, through psychoeducation, so skills training. That's something that I kind of specialise in, the cognitive stress reduction skills and cycle closing, and fundamentally that accountability. And I also think that as a professional, a mental health professional, I'm able to quite quickly signpost if I think that more support is needed. So let me move on. I'm going to skip through that because I'm aware that we're almost out of time. Viktor Frankl said this: between stimulus and response there's a space, and in that space is our power to choose our response, and in our response lies our growth and freedom. I end with that because I want you to shoehorn space in between in your life. I want you to find space, because in the space between is growth and freedom from stress. We have to find a way of getting this a priority for our self-care into our busy diaries and into our working lives. And I cannot urge you more strongly to do that, because the outcomes are so much better when we do. And I don't know, I think I might have just about landed on time, Belinda, but I'd love to answer questions. I'm happy to hang around a little bit longer if anyone's got any more questions. But please check me out on LinkedIn, or email me through the Workplace Collective if you want to talk further about what we do at the Workplace Collective. But otherwise, I've been really delighted to be with you this lunchtime, and thank you so much for your contributions and your attention.
Thank you so much, Kerry. That's been it was a stop tour of all the things that we need to know. I don't know. Does anybody have any questions before Kerry needs to leave us, or you need to leave us?
Ah, thank you, Sharon. I'm looking at the chat box, Belinda, and there are dots. So
Indeed.
Mike, did you have a question, or are you just putting your hand up to wave at me?
Well, I more a question than waving. I'm in a bit of a tricky position here in that I manage a good number of the people in the call. So I'm always looking at how best to manage the team, giving them both the support they need, the help, the space, the capacity, where they aren't under undue stress, but also in a way that, because we rely so heavily on legal aid, we have to work pretty efficiently and effectively to do so. So balancing those two aims. So I would ask, what advice would you have for the management team on getting that right?
Oh, that's a million-dollar question, isn't it? Oh, I wonder if there's anyone else on the call that wants to give that question a go. Or I guess two things I would say is connection and communication, because I think if you are working closely enough with your colleagues to be able to really work out where people are at, when I talk about the stress bucket, genuinely what's stressful and difficult for one person isn't for another, and recognizing that everybody at different points in their life are at a different point. And if you are a manager close enough to your colleague to know where they are, what's going on in their life, if there are some major challenges, for example, then that helps you to perhaps manage what they're experiencing. And I think that requires communication. So I would say always having an open door to talking about mental health and emotional issues. And oftentimes we squirm away from that, don't we? We don't really like opening the door to difficult conversations, especially if we think that a colleague might cry on us or something, and we want to kind of mop that up. And we actually did a whole series of training on having difficult conversations with a big engineering firm up here in Skipton recently, but for managers, how do I deal with mental health issues? And I think that those two things, if you work close enough to know where someone's at, then that gives you insight, and then that ability to be able to communicate as to what they might need in terms of actual support. And sometimes that might be reasonable adjustments. Sometimes we have a duty of care as an employer, and I'm not sure what the status of your employees are, but we certainly have a mandated duty to protect them from exposure to mental health distress. So I think we have to be aware of what's going on. And then I guess it would also be to pull in external support. So if you do think that an individual is not okay, I don't know whether you guys have things like EAP schemes so that you can access kind of Bupa and things. If you can't do that, then actually referring people onto something like Law Care. I imagine their telephone helpline would take calls from people that are mediators, family mediators. So accessing some support kind of immediately from that would be helpful. And then also a GP-led support through mental health services via the NHS, and then of course there's the private sector too. So signposting, communication, connection. How did I do? Anyone else got anything they could add to that? Because that was a big question.
Supervision, I would say.
Supervision. I should have said that. Who said that?
Denise,
Oh,
the supervisor.
Yeah, supervision. Yeah.
Or one of
God,
them.
I'm rubbish at this, aren't I? Supervision.
No, Kerry, very good, very excellent.
And so I guess what I see most of my cohort monthly, and it is that accountability. It's that moment of U-turn. How are you doing? And I think it's like letting steam out of the pressure cooker. I think it literally reduces stress, because I'll often say when you can shift your perspective, I use the example of a snow globe all the time. Sometimes when people come in, they're definitely stuck in the scene. They're in the snow globe and they're being kind of bashed about by the snow floating around and getting in their eye. And at the end of supervision, they're holding the snow globe in their hand. And so they've observed what's going on, and they've seen the kind of games that are at play, and they've seen their response to it, and they've seen with a shift in their perspective, and that enables them to take that position of witness, and that shifts their burden of responsibility, their caretaker or their superhero. I think it should be mandatory that there is a bent towards therapeutic supervision for mediators as well as those in family law, and let's hope it comes down the line. There is an idea that it might be the insurance companies that actually end up making it something that is a practice that is as mandatory as it would be for me as a practitioner, because the level of human distress is the same. It's bonkers, really. In fact, lots of people in the world of psychology scratch their head and go, wait, they don't? How do they survive? How do you survive? Because we couldn't do our job with the resilience and the longevity without having that vehicle to support our mental health. Thank you for queuing me up for that, Denise. I am so grateful.
I'm just gonna jump in there because I sit on the standards board, and we actually are looking that stress and burnout is a fundamental part of the CPD requirement for mediators.
Yeah.
So whilst we're not looking at putting it into the PPC explicitly within that, but it's something that we are definitely exploring.
Yeah.
As a sector-wide initiative.
Yeah. Absolutely. How can we not look at when we look at the statistics? They're terrifying. And I think we absolutely need to train up and be self-aware of what of where we find you all as an industry. Yeah. Much to say, I could witter on about that all for the rest of the afternoon.
I would agree with you that therapeutic support, not therapy, but having that level of therapeutics. I mean, I have a therapeutic background, so of course I would say that. But I think it's absolutely, really key, because we're all human beings, aren't we? And
Absolutely.
we're dealing with human emotions.
Yeah.
So
absolutely. And I think so. I often get asked, what is reflective about? What does it look like? And I think for me, and now my kind of hybridy model looks like I check in with how are you? How are your clients? How's your workplace setting on the whole? And sometimes a massive chunk of it is how have you? How are you? And sometimes it isn't. It's all client orientated. But I think having that flexibility to be able to recognize that how you are doing, the lemons that are flying in your life are going to impact how you turn up in that room with your clients. So it isn't therapy, Denise, you're absolutely right. But it definitely has a bent towards it in terms of self-awareness. And then skills. You'll have heard, I guess, after my presentation, I'm all for skilling you up to be able to do this in between, because you have to be able to manage your own mental health and manage your own, mind to deal with this in between. So, Rebecca, I think you've got your hand up. Was there a question that you wanted to ask?
I was just going to say that I think as mediators now, who are all generally working from home, so we're all quite isolated, I think certainly for me, a really key part of closing that circle of stress is just being able to talk to somebody about a case and not as sort of anything as formal as a supervision, but sometimes you just want to be able to pick up the phone and go, oh my God, that was a car crash, or this happened, or that happened, or I'd never heard that one before. And actually, that is what reduces your stress levels, rather than sitting with it on your own. And I think that's something that is really important to keep this idea of this sort of community that you're working within. And obviously, if there are lots of people who are self-employed, that might be a group that has been set up. But for those of us that are kind of working for an organization, it's ensuring that there is a virtual office, there is a room you can walk into after your mediation and go, oh, blooming heck, you're never going to guess what happened there. And sometimes it might just be a 2-minute phone call you need to have with somebody, rather than an hour's supervision or whatever. But I think being able to manage that, and that's difficult when you've got people who are employed, like, as we all know, in all different parts of the world, and actually some in the trust, we are all different parts of the world, but through that there needs to be kind of team building within the organization, I think, to feel so that everybody feels that they can just ring another mediator and have those conversations. That's my feeling about that's certainly what helps me, I would say.
Certainly for those of you that at the trust that I supervise, I have said, and I want to repeat, you can phone me at any time and you don't need a reason. It's absolutely, if I can answer the phone, I will. If you want to text me, that's absolutely fine. And you don't have to have a reason. It can just be, God, that was awful. As you said, Rebecca, it can be a 2-minute call or a half an hour call or whatever you need, really. And I'll just call you back whenever I can, because I think that's really important as well. You don't know how you're going to respond. You don't know what you're going to get. you know, I mean, yes, we're online, but you don't know, as I say, what's going to come in through the door, how that's going to impact on you, whether it's going to resonate with anything that's going on in your life, you know. And you know, I hope that you all feel, those of you, you know, that I do supervise, that you all feel that, you know, you have permission to do that, and you're welcome to do that.
Yeah. Thank you, Denise. Thank you, Rebecca. Great point. I absolutely agree with you. And we would have done, wouldn't we, prior to this hybrid world, we would have eye rolled and gone, oh God. And we co-regulate. We are a social species. So it is critical for you to find ways of doing that, because it's helpful. It's Mental Health Awareness Week in May, and it is around the idea of community, because we are socially, it is being depleted out of most of our environment. So maypoles, that's the word I want you to go away with as well. Think about finding maypoles. If you were born in the 1970s like me, you were forced to dance around maypoles with a ribbon, and so find some that will help you as well. I know, I recognize, like during the work day, you'll want to kind of eye roll and blow off steam, but also finding things outside of work's really, really helpful.
Fun, I think, having fun.
Yeah. Thank you, Rebecca, and thank you, everyone. It's been really great to be with you all.
I just wanted to ask you one last question, Kerry. When you mentioned about trauma-informed training earlier, because I think to some extent that helps us, doesn't it? If we're trauma-informed and we can use language that calms people down, I'm kind of almost thinking of, you know, when you get that first referral and someone's you know, you're not in the mediation session, so you can't do anything to sort of try and manage the process. You just get the full on sort of whatever emotion it is they have. Then it does that. Do you do training in that, and what and how does that help organizations?
Yeah, you're absolutely right, because oftentimes I'm guessing that sometimes you get phone calls and it's the first time someone's gone, okay, I need to end my marriage, or I need to I need to resolve this issue. And so you are very likely to get the absolute barrage, the tsunami wave of distress. And so lots of snot, lots of tears, lots of hyperventilation, lots of really, really kind of overwhelming. You might be on the end of the phone. The other day, my work phone rang, I picked it up. It was actually a mistake. Because I got caught up in this kind of 20-minute drama. But the point is, it wasn't really a mistake. I was glad to be available. But I should say that in brackets. But the point is, how do you handle someone that is having a kind of nervous system overwhelmed? How can you cue them to downregulate their system through breath, through their senses? I do the kind of 5 senses. And so, yeah, I actually did the away day at Hall Brown Family Law in Manchester, and we did a whole session on how do you help somebody that's having a panic attack? How do you help someone that is suicidal? How do you help somebody who is just can't get their words out and is sort of broken down in the office in front of you? What are the trauma-informed ways that you can downregulate someone's nervous system? Because there's quite a few good ones that I could do, and maybe I'll come back and do another session for you, Belinda, on that, because be happy to be involved. And I should say the other thing is recognizing that you're also interfacing with personality disorders, and if any of you have interfaced with somebody on the narcissistic personality or the antagonistic personality spectrum, then there's a good chance that you don't come out of that uninjured as well, because there's a very sophisticated projection that goes on, and you can get caught up in the story. So recognizing that you can be sucked into that too. That's another subject altogether, but I'll let you all go and have your lunch.
Thank you so much, Kerry. It's been really helpful, and I think we've got 2 more presentations that have come out of this that we might be inviting you back for. But thank you so much for giving us your time today. It's been really helpful, and I think some of the comments when people were leaving were saying that they've taken lots of notes, and it's been really helpful. So thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you,
adding mediators to the long list of people who will benefit.
Yeah. Okay. Go well, everyone. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks, Kerry.
Thanks. Bye-bye.